Last spring's Ontario budget overhauled how the province will allocate student aid beginning next year. The intention, the province says, is to make post-secondary education more accessible to students from low-income families. In fact, it was pitched as free. To examine this and consider whether it signals new thinking about the level of education required to participate in today's economy, we welcome, in St. John's, Newfoundland, via Skype, Christine Arnold. She's assistant professor in the Faculty of Education, Post-Secondary Studies at Memorial University. And here in studio, Alex Usher, president of Higher Education Strategy Associates. And we're happy to have both of you in St. John's and here in Toronto in our studio today. Nice to meet you both. Let's just put on the record here some of what the province of Ontario is talking about. Shelton, if you would, let's bring this up. The Ontario Student Grant. It comes into effect in 2017-18. Students from families earning less than $50,000 a year will receive grants equivalent to Ontario's average tuition. Most students from families earning $83,000 or less will also receive free average tuition. Students are expected to contribute $3,000 per year towards their education costs, and there is an 8-term maximum for full-time students to claim the grant and 12 terms for full-time students with disabilities. Christine, start us off. What do you think?
Sure. So I think that this is a positive example of simplification. I think that what we're seeing here is that we had roughly 24 different programs for student assistance in Ontario until this time, and that this is a nice bundling of the programs. We're not necessarily seeing any difference in new investments. It's just that they've been packaged differently. There's more transparency, and there's definitely more efficient timing. We're seeing that students are able to see how much they're going to owe for tuition as well as grant money up front, instead of what we've seen in the past, whereas students actually pay their tuition and then receive what they'll be receiving from OSAP after the fact. Also, we're seeing that the tuition and the education tax credits have been cut and they've been placed within this grant. And I think that's nice as well for students because of the fact that they can see this right away and not actually have to see this money come back later to them, which can be difficult to assess how much that will be and whether or not they'll receive it within their term of education.
Okay, let's hold there. Let's hold on there for 1 second. Alex, let me get you to weigh in. What do you think of this, the way it's been packaged now?
Well, I would largely echo what Christine said. The issue has never been that Ontario doesn't spend a lot of money on student aid. Ontario spends a lot of money on student aid. And what happened last March when the federal government decided it was going to be able to double the size of its grants, Ontario was able to say, well, actually, we can rejig some of what we're doing and create a different kind of package for students, one that gives the money up front, one that makes it more predictable, and hopefully will help change minds about affordability.
Does the upfront thing really make a big difference in terms of attracting people to it?
I think it does. I suspect it has a lot more to do with the choice of institution rather than where you go. I mean, people decide whether or not to go to post-secondary usually a long time before they know anything about the price or anything about student assistance. But I think it's very different, you know, as Christine said, now you agree to go to an institution, then maybe you get your student aid, it's a black box, you don't really know how much you're going to get. As of 2018-19, you're actually going to get the message from your institution. It'll be, welcome to Wilfrid Laurier, our full-time tuition is $7,500, here's $8,000 in grants. That completely changes the kind of psychology around decision-making, I think.
Who do you think, Christine, are the biggest beneficiaries of this?
Sure, I think our low and middle income students are going to be the largest beneficiaries in the sense that, as Alex stated, it's really nice that they can see this information up front. I think a lot of times students from low income families have difficulty determining what the cost of education actually is and how much they'll be paying. And in the past, our Ontario student assistance, it was actually coupled grants and loans. And so the fact that we have that decoupled now means that there may be less worry or hesitation from students from low-income families to invest in education, knowing what it's actually going to cost and having that be transparent ahead of time.
Well, okay, Alex, let me play a bit of the curmudgeon here. Yes, but it may well be that this upfront money is going to cover tuition, but let's say you're a student, you're in grade 12 right now, you're living in rural Ontario, you know that a huge chunk of whatever expenditures you incur to go to post-secondary next year are going to be just plain and simply living expenses. You're going to be moving from potentially somewhere in rural Ontario. Let's pick up the example you just had of Wilfrid Laurier University.
Sure.
What if you're moving from North Bay to Kitchener-Waterloo? I mean, how does this help you
Well,
then?
I think that's actually that's an interesting example, right? Because now I would suggest you probably have the choice to go to Waterloo, whereas you might have just wanted to stay in North Bay at Nipissing. I think if you didn't know, because then at least you'd know you could stay at home. And I think actually knowing that you're going to have that money up front actually does give you a little bit more choice of institutions.
If you lived in Barrie, would it be any different?
You're probably getting more money up front. It's not covering the whole thing. You are still going to have to cover that, and maybe that's going to come through loans. There are still going to be a lot of loans in the system. At the same time that we're giving students more grants, we're also making it easier for them to borrow. So these new grants isn't necessarily going to reduce student debt because students are going to have new opportunities to borrow as well. So I think, is it a cure-all? Does it serve everybody? No, it doesn't. But it serves an awful lot of people very well.
Anybody know how many people are likely to take advantage of this?
I know that they said that all students with the $50,000 of parental income, and then they said about half of students whose parental income would be about $86,000.
Christine, let's tackle this. About 2/3 of Ontario's adults have some kind of post-secondary credentials. That is higher than the average of the OECD, which is 56% apparently. So given that, do we really have an access to post-secondary education problem in the province of Ontario?
I'd say that there are two types of access. One is how many go, and the second is who. And so I think when we look at access, we're looking at who. We do have one of the largest, and that is really because of our college system. Our colleges actually enroll a great amount of students from underrepresented backgrounds and students from low-income families. And I think what's important here is that we do notice students from low-income families not attending in the same vein as other students. And so it's important that we reach those students and we make them see that education is for them as well. But not only do we have such high enrollment, it's important of the fact that in Ontario, that's been the case for the moment, but this double cohort is dropping off. And so we are seeing we need to fill in those numbers and we need to reach these students.
If we do, though, Alex, have a situation where there are grants and there are loans and there are bursaries and now we've got this new thing, where free tuition. I mean, is tuition really a problem in Ontario now?
I think tuition is only ever a problem to the extent that people think they can't afford it. And I think that's one of the problems that we've had here is that we've been very generous, but we've been very opaque about this generosity. So as if you can give this message up front very early, don't worry about the money, guys, it's there. I think that will make a difference. I mean, to your point, do we have a problem? Compared to most jurisdictions in the world, I think Ontario does very well on access, on both types of access that Christine was talking about. It doesn't mean you can't do better, because we know that post-secondary education is still, in large part, a ticket to a middle-class future. And if you don't leave that open to everybody, if you don't make that as accessible as possible to people from lower-income backgrounds, you have a long-term problem in society.
All right, in which case, Alex, do we have a problem in the province of Ontario today that tuition is still too much for too many people?
I don't think so. I think we just made it difficult to pay for it, in a sense that the schedule of payments is difficult. $7,000 in tuition is not a lot to a family living in Rosedale. It is a lot to someone living in I don't know, certain parts of Etobicoke or Scarborough. I mean, you get different kind of ability to pay, and so you want to be able to tailor it. And so what we have in this proposal, you're making. There's no new money here, right? This is all about rejigging about money. It's rejigging timing, and it's taking money from some people and giving it to others. It's about making the total amount of money a little bit bigger for people who are low-income families, and a little bit, and you're making tuition increase for people who are higher income, right?
So just to be clear, this is not costing the taxpayers of Ontario any more.
It's actually saving them money.
How do you figure?
The cost of the tax credit is in the region, if I remember the numbers correctly, sort of mid-$500 million. They're not actually reinvesting they're taking away that tax credit, they're not reinvesting all of it in student aid. Some of it's going to universities. So, they will use it one of the things they may use it for is to keep the cost of tuition down. But there's actually less money going to students and their families under this new program than there used to be. It's just arranged differently.
Okay. Christine, let me try this. Post-secondary institutions, people may not know, but there's a cap on them right now, if I understand this properly, as to how much they're allowed to increase tuition. I mean, they run their universities, but the government of Ontario does have some say as a chief funder into how much they can raise tuition. Now, the cap on tuition increases expires next year, I gather. And my question is, Should post-secondary institutions take advantage of this moment where, in some respects, you have a new potential way of doing business and say, to Alex's point, the kids who come to these universities from Rosedale, we're going to really increase your tuition a lot because you can afford to pay more. And those of you who are from different parts of Ontario where you don't make as much money, we'll freeze you. Is that an option going forward?
Sure. I think that would be difficult. I wouldn't like to see that personally. And I think why is because that's very politically charged. And I would wonder how institutions would set that in place. And I wonder at times about the ad hoc manner in which education systems may put that in place. I think right now what we have with this Ontario grant is that the province is setting fees and they've actually simplified the process. And so we have a standard tuition, but we're actually investing in students based on some of that family income differently and providing them with more money in certain situations, given their background and how many students may be in their family. So I think if we're already have something that's looking after that, we may be duplicating efforts, which would be a little bit difficult. And also we've moved so much towards streamlining to actually make it more money again. It would be difficult for students, I think, to comprehend those changes.
Should we, Alex, make tuition more progressive in Ontario?
I don't think it would be a bad thing. And I think that's one of the things that this system allows, actually, is I don't think we're going to be talking about what's tuition this year. I think we're going to talk about what the tuition curve looks like. Because it is a curve now, in a sense that they're, at $50,000, it's going to be effectively free, and then it'll progressively go up. So as long as you're holding the people who are most vulnerable harmless, as long as you're saying you're always going to give you grants equal to average tuition, or maybe a little bit bigger than that, does it matter if at the top end you're paying $8,000 or $10,000 or $12,000? I think if you're in favor of progressive taxes, it's difficult to make a case against progressive user fees, which is effectively what this is going to be.
I mean, they've sort of done it already in a way, right? If you go to dental school, they deregulated the tuition on dental school a while ago, for example, or other, potential careers where you can make a lot more money. They kicked the tuition fees way up a while ago. Why not go the rest of the way?
I think there's a different logic around professional programs where the benefits are significantly higher. I mean, you come out of an arts or science program, you're likely going to be making mid-50s, mid-60s when you're in your 30s, $1,000 that is. If you go into law, you go into dentistry, it's a very different kind of picture. And so I think the argument around why you charge particular fees is just different in a first entry undergraduate than a later one.
Christine, is the fact that this Ontario student grant is now in place, quote unquote, free tuition for people who come from modest means, is that now to say that society recognizes that in order to get anywhere in this economy, you need to have a university or college education?
Sure, it's a fair question. I think we have understood that for a long time. I think that most jobs in the post-secondary market at this moment require post-secondary. And so when students are entering the labor market, they know that they'll have that competitive edge. We've even seen a big push from certificates and diplomas up to degrees as more and more students are looking for work afterwards and competing for those positions. So I think that this is a recognition, and it's also a recognition that the cost can be a little difficult to understand at times, and so not everyone is accessing education in the same way.
In which case, Alex, let me ask the next question, which is, the public paid for elementary and secondary education because at one time, that's what you needed to get a good job. We've now heard Christine say it. In order to get a good job in this society, you've got to have a post-secondary education.
Yep.
Should it be free as well?
I think,
for everybody?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. The problem is that tertiary education is much more varied than primary or secondary, right? I mean, there's huge differences in fields of study. There's huge differences in the amount of time that you take to do different things. For some things in trades, you can do them in a year and a half, 2 years. Other times you go into a PhD, that's 12 or 14. So it's not a homogeneous good the way others are. So I think we are getting to a point now where you're at 70% of the population, 25 to 34, are getting some kind of credential. I think you're at a place where you could imagine community college being free. You're seeing more and more U.S. states doing that, and sort of saying, well, you know what? There's a base level of access to post-secondary education that you need to guarantee, and so I could certainly see that. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be your $25,000 animation projects at Sheridan,
Gotcha.
right? But certainly those kind of base level community college programs, I could imagine them being free in the next 10 years. Yeah.
Christine, I remember reading in former Finance Minister Greg Sorbera's book, he mentioned an attempt by him to get the then Dalton McGuinty government to make post-secondary education free because he believed what I just said, that in order to get a good job, you had to have a post-secondary degree these days. Do you think post-secondary education should therefore be free, or government should be looking at ways to make it free for everyone?
Sure. I think that, as Alex had stated, a baseline of education, and we've seen that be free in various jurisdictions, I think that that would be very important. I think why is because you have students who are able to enter from various means, have you stated, and have that entry and get to see what post-secondary looks like, whether it's right for them, what programs they want to be enrolled in. I do worry, as Alex stated, about professional programs because some are definitely more costly to the province than others. And so I think that that baseline of tuition would certainly be helpful. And if students are moving on in their education, that we could provide more funding to them over time in a staggered way, that would be helpful.
Okay, in our last few minutes, let's tackle this last quote here from Matthew Lau of the Financial Post under the category of, is this too much of a good thing? He's a U of T finance and economics student. He says, making university education cheaper will fuel more overconsumption. It gets even worse when you consider where the marginal enrollment will take place and among what kinds of students. High ability students who enroll in mathematics, business, or science programs are already in university because they believe the increased future incomes will provide a sufficient return on their investments in education. Marginal enrollment from eliminating tuition fees will likely come from unmotivated, lower ability students and in less practical programs like theater history or equity studies. That's harsh, Alex, but is it true?
No. I think it's certainly true that it's designed to stimulate more enrollment, and it's true that people who are more academically able are probably already in university or college, and so the people you're getting are likely to be more marginal academically, and they're going to require more assistance to help them get them through. I don't think they're going to go into history and theater. If you're not motivated, those are still pretty motivated subjects. By and large, people who don't go to post-secondary are people who are very ambivalent about what they want their future career to be. But what they do know is if they're going to spend the time and they're going to spend the money and energy to go through, they want it to be for something practical. So I think where you see a lot more of the push is actually on much more applied programs and applied degree programs that you see, for instance, in community colleges.
Christine, let me ask the question to you in a different way. A couple of generations ago, when maybe only 10 or 20% of the public were going all the way through with a post-secondary program, having a college or university degree was kind of a big deal. Today, if it's 2/3 and going to be even higher tomorrow, does that necessarily reduce the value of a post-secondary diploma or certificate or degree?
Sure, I would say it doesn't. I think some of the assumptions in the quote we read were that these students would be any less motivated or that they're any less a right to be at these institutions. And I don't know that we're talking about admissions here. Admissions standards, and in terms of who is admitted and the numbers that are admitted each year, we're not talking about those increases. Whether they occur or not is besides the point. I think that the value of a post-secondary education comes much larger than just getting a career. There's civic engagement, there's initiatives and programs that are run in communities, there's lower crime rates, and those individuals are able to have those critical thinking skills and some of the other skills that we train them in leadership that they can bring out into our communities more widely.
Alex, in our last minute here, why don't you put the icing on top of the cake here and remind everybody, what's the point of getting a post-secondary education anyway?
Well, it's to put skills for life. I know people want to make a lot of very tight lines between what you study in school and what you study and what you go on to do, but that's rarely true. You know what I mean? I mean, the university degrees, you need some kind of mix of skills that allow you to be a critical thinker, allow you to be a good citizen, and that allow you to contribute quickly in the economy. You have to have those hard technical skills. I think some of them to get that first job. Not everyone's going to be out there, making apps or creating the next Pokemon Go, but they got to know how to work in a modern office environment. But you can get that doing a lot of different things. So I think the important thing with university in particular, find something you like to do and learn a few hard skills along the way to make sure you can get that first job.
And apparently Christine found something she'd like to do at Memorial University in Newfoundland. Do you miss us in Ontario yet?
I do miss you in Ontario. I absolutely enjoy the community there, and especially the post-secondary community. But I'm branching out and making some connections across the country. So I appreciate you having me on today.
Not at all. Well done. Memorial University, obviously a great institution with a long history. So we're glad you could join us via Skype from Memorial University in St. John's. Thanks, Christine Arnold and Alex Usher from Higher Education Strategy Associates here in our Toronto studios. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.